Thank you. Thank you for your time and thank you for being willing to meet with me. As I explained in the email, I'm a graduate student in a pastoral clinical mental health counseling program,
Hmm.
and part what the program is about is that we as counselors learn to integrate religion and spirituality when it comes to counseling clients. So if I had a client that was affiliated with Taoism, uh, how do we take that into consideration? What important questions that we would need to ask, or considerations that we would need to remember when we would have such a client, and so on. Um, I'd like to start with who are you, how are you, and where you are as an introduction.
Sure. My name is Master Richard Prococo. Um, I've studied with Grandmaster Alex Anatole at the Center of Traditional Taoist Studies for, I would say, 39 years now. So I met Grandmaster Anatole when I was in college. I was a college student. Um, and I started to study Taoism with him, and it opened up my life and it touched my heart and soul. My life has been dedicated to the study of Taoism, and since, to be honest, um, Taoism has this interesting concept that it's not for everybody, but if you have a piece of Tao in your soul, basically, then this allows you to gravitate towards that and understand the principles and accept them. Basically, it's a rough philosophy, but it's not for everybody. If it resonates with you and it works for you, then it means it's for you. Basically, that's this piece of the Tao is inside of you. That's the idea.
When you say it's a rough philosophy, what do you mean by that?
Well, Taoism is a religion and a philosophy. Um, basically, um, the idea of Taoism is that nature is kind of the model that we follow. You know, God and concepts that are esoteric to people, because we're so limited and finite. It's very hard for us to understand large religious concepts like God and the concept of God. What does God expect from us? What do the cosmos want from us? Um, really, the only thing that we can see in this world as a model that the gods have put in place is nature and the natural system. Kind of Taoists were probably like the original naturalists. Um, so, looking at nature, you can pretty much see the character of Tao in nature, and that's really what you're supposed to emulate. This idea of the character of Tao in nature. For instance, we were just discussing this recently. Um, you can see, for instance, like little animals in nature, for instance, like I live in the suburbs of Massachusetts. I spent more time home this last year than before, obviously, because of the pandemic. And like, for instance, I see like a little rabbit in my yard, and while that rabbit is at peace, it looks to us like he's at peace. He's eating and he's chewing clover in my yard. And yet he has like kind of an eye out, kind of surveying and looking. He's very, very cautious and careful, actually, because life is dangerous, especially for a rabbit. So it's interesting. Well, to us, it looks like it's this peaceful concept of nature. The rabbit is actually incredibly alert, and he's alert to the dangers around him, even though he's interacting seamlessly during his day. Um, as he, if I was to take a step towards this rabbit, he would immediately see me, and then there's like an escape hole under this fence that he's dug, and in a second he's in this hole and gone. So the idea is that that life is is very dangerous, and it's full of chaos, absurdity, and suffering. It's one of the base premises of Taoism, actually. And we need to learn to navigate this chaos and absurdity. And the way to do that is to be incredibly cautious and careful during our daily routine. And you can see this character of the Tao in these little animals, basically. So that's an example of what we can learn from nature, for instance. Um, there's a parable of poetry in the Tao Te Ching, which is like the Bible of Taoism, written by the great sage Lao Tzu. In this writings, there's a passage about the character of the sage, and the character of the sage is cautious, like crossing a wintry stream. That's exactly what the verbiage says. So this caution, like when you're crossing a wintry stream, it may be that the ice is thick enough to support your weight. It may be that it isn't. So when you walk across this thin ice, you're walking incredibly cautious and incredibly careful through life. And that's this idea of the character of the sage. And you can see this character, exemplified in nature. And that's just one of the examples of using nature as like as a guide for us in our life.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's deep. My next question would be, how does one become an ordained Taoist priest?
It's a it's That's an interesting question. I mean, it requires years of study and dedication with a lineaged master. To find a true master of Taoism is not a simple thing. Um, I was very lucky in my life that I met Grandmaster Anatole when I was young, and that at that time, the temple and the idea of the religious organization was emerging, and I was involved with that. I mean, I was very lucky. I mean, basically, you need a lineage master and what that means is who's had training from a certified master and his master has had training from a certified master. It's usually a very long lineage and an oral tradition of transference of teachings. We've written like six book series, in Taoism, but most of the clans of Taoists, their techniques and secrets, they held them very close to the vest. They didn't share them with other people, for instance. They were their tactical advantage. So a lot of the traditions are transmitted orally from master to student. But basically, you have to study for years and you have to show competency in certain disciplines. For instance, philosophy, the principles of the Tao Te Ching, as we've been talking about, meditation. You need to show, proficiency in meditation and all aspects of that, connection with the great ultimate and the celestial cosmos. It's one of the ways we can purify our existence. From a counseling perspective, it's kind of interesting. You basically connect with the celestial spirits and then you communicate with them and they actually counsel you. We believe it's very, very hard to be counseled by another finite mortal because they have the same confusions that we do. Certainly, connection with the celestial cosmos through meditation and prayer is one of the things that you need to be proficient at to be a Taoist priest. Also, there's a physical aspect. We do Chinese Qigong yoga, and that's a very important aspect too. There's herbology, which is another interesting aspect, actually. So I would say the three celestial bodies need to be harmonized together to be a Taoist priest, and that would be the physical body, the intellectual body, and the spiritual body. So we need to train ourselves physically to be healthy and clear. We need to train ourselves intellectually so we can see life clearly and navigate and be cautious and careful as we were talking about. And we need to develop the spiritual body, basically to have a connection with the celestial cosmos, because at some point in our existence, we will die and we'll join that celestial entity. So the idea of meditation on a periodic basis is to kind of acquaint yourself with the celestial dimension in preparation for your ultimate departure.
There was sounds to me like you're saying that looking to the ways of the ancestors is an important part of what it means to be a Taoist priest. Is that what you're saying? Part of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, the techniques are ancient and they're based on the principles of Chinese shamanism. So the idea of shamanism is to connect with the celestial cosmos and to get guidance from that. This year, we've actually been fortunate enough to get two patents from the U.S. Patent Office. One is for Taoist Lin Hun Therapy, and one is for Taoist divine guidance. And those are spiritual techniques that we use to clarify people, to get rid of their confusion and to clarify their life.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of interesting. So the principles of Taoist divine guidance are exactly, and it is related to the idea of counseling, kind of. It's interesting. And it's what I was alluding to previously, that you actually, um, by, by getting rid of the confusion in life, then the idea is the celestial entity will communicate with you because you're no longer confused. If your mind is full of confusion, you can't even pray to the gods.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that energy has a frequency, and this is by the principles of physics. Each energetical wave has a frequency, and the celestial cosmos also has a chi or energetic frequency. And the idea is that each person also has a frequency to their soul. That frequency is affected by your physicality. It's affected by your intellectual and spiritual beliefs. And it's affected by how you live your life, the actions that you take on a daily basis. The idea is like any frequency, you try and tune your frequency to the frequency of the celestial cosmos to create a sympathetic vibration. As those things align, then you become like a piece of the great celestial cosmos. So it takes a long time to get rid of the confusion in life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's how you tune your frequency to be closer to the celestial cosmos. That's the idea. So this idea of aligning frequencies. And then when you die, because your frequency is in tune with the great ultimate, then you kind of join that celestial unity.
As I was looking through the website for the Center of Traditional Taoist Studies, I noticed that word that you use, confusion. What do you mean by confusion? Like, for example, in Buddhism, when they speak of suffering, they when they talk about a loss of a loved one or anxiety, depression, or, well, so when you say confusion, what does that look like?
It's a great it's a great question, actually. Um, we believe that, and you're absolutely right, those things, depression, anxiety, I mean, those are all manifestations of confusion in your life. Usually, what we believe is that when an individual's expectations and their limitations don't go together, then that's what creates anxiety and depression. So if you don't see yourself clearly, you believe that you're supposed to do this particular thing, but you can't, or you don't have the skills to do it, or it's just impossible. That creates this gap between your expectations and your limitations. Confusion is basically a result from social education. The idea of righteousness and benevolence and equality and fairness, those concepts, they really don't exist in nature. They're idealist concepts that don't really exist. I mean, if you look at nature, you have like the rabbit, for instance. The rabbit is designed by whoever put this world in existence to run. Basically, that's what he does. He doesn't hunt. He doesn't, he doesn't hunt other creatures because of his limitations. That's what he is. By his original nature, he can chew grass and he can run. The wolf, on the other hand, is a hunter, but their challenges are still very similar, right? I mean, the rabbit runs because that's what he can do. The wolf hunts because that's what he's designed to do. So each individual entity has an original nature, and the test in life is to understand your original nature and to continue to foster that in this life. The Taoists believe that the soul exists from two components, a prenatal soul and a postnatal soul. That means that energy comes to your soul when you're born. You already have that energy. It's the energy of previous existence. And then the postnatal energy is this life, this rotation. You need to develop your physical, intellectual, and spiritual existence within this rotation. And then that gets added to your prenatal energy when you die. Your prenatal energy is basically the things that are yours. For instance, like Mozart could write sonnets at 2 years old, right? Now, I mean, he was an accomplished musician at 2 years old. So basically, the skill that he developed as a musician came prenatally. Basically, he had been a musician somewhere else at some other time in some other existence. So that's the idea of prenatal energy. For instance, any predispositions that you have as an individual, things that interest you, things that make you complete, things that are seductive for you and interesting. Those are the things that are in your soul. Those are the things that are part of you. The test in life is to try and understand those things and to further cultivate them. A lot of times, our original nature clashes with our social programming. So we're taught to conform to a status quo, for instance, in society, that we're supposed to have 2.3 children. We're supposed to have, a dog. We're supposed to have, and these are the things that conform to the status quo in society. For many people, that status quo isn't right. You know what I mean? I mean, the principles of social education don't fit with your original nature. I mean, the idea of an original nature is that the original material constrains the outcomes of what can happen. For instance, if the original nature of something was a small piece of wood, then I could carve maybe a whistle from it, but I couldn't carve like a chair because the original nature doesn't allow you to do that. So one of the tests in life is to understand your own original nature and to continue to foster that during your life. And in order to do that, a lot of times you have to get rid of the confusion around you, the things that people are telling you you should do, the things that they're telling you that are good for you to do, which in fact may not really be good. I mean, the idea of society is like a propagation mechanism, right? I mean, society wants us to do what's good for society, not really for us as an individual. So we have to navigate the structure somehow. We have to complete ourselves individually and yet still be some kind of member of society. The Taoists believe that the goal of life is intellectual and spiritual development, so you can continue life in some kind of other way when you die. So the spiritual evolution is really the goal of life in Taoism. It's not to create a utopian society, and it's not to to foster the world here. It's to foster your individual soul, and then for your individual soul to join this celestial cosmos at the time of death. It's a lot. I mean, but the idea is that confusion will make you live your life in a certain way. I mean, if I believe like that it's never too late, right? That's one of the societal principles. It's never too late. Now, I mean, I'm, 58 years old, right? I mean, I've received things in the mail that say, after 65, in the second half of your life, take a small business loan and open a business, right? Now, at 65 years old, you're not going to have a second half of life, right? Most people don't live to be 130. So, I mean, that's like one of the ideas of this social propagation, right? They're trying to get me to open a business at 65. Is that the thing for me to do at 65? Is that the thing for most people to do at 65? Probably not, right? I mean, the amount of time and effort and energy that goes into some kind of business development should happen at a much younger age than 65. So it's just one of the ideas that society propagates to you, that it's never too late. Like at 60, I can go to college and become a brain surgeon. That's probably not exactly true.
A lot of what you said resonated a great deal with me. Personally, throughout my life, I've been constantly in situations, events, experiences, and relationships with others in which I often find myself, whatever is in that situation, that relationship is often in conflict with who I am from within. And oftentimes,
Exactly.
in those situations, in those relationships with other people, particularly when I was a child, my expression of who I am naturally was being diminished, dismissed, denied, unacknowledged, unrecognized. And after after I started to go into my teenage years, that was when I started to explore the philosophies of the world. I wanted to know why people did what they did in the way that they did it, and why I did the way I do in the way that I do it. And I do see in my bookshelf here, I have so many books, and I've done a lot of reading on how to do what you just said, which was cultivate my individuality and spirituality from the inside out.
Absolutely. And that is the goal of life. And you're absolutely right. That conflict of who you are internally and who you're supposed to be externally, it's one of the great tests in life. I mean, that's one of the great tests in life, to harmonize those two beings. As a matter of fact, Taoism has a concept of what they call camouflage. They said that a lot of time, in order for you to cultivate internally what's really important to you, your internal value system, you need to camouflage yourself externally. Because, I mean, as a Taoist person, I'm very different than most of the people in this society, right? I mean, just because of my religious and philosophical beliefs. So instead of me trying to convert everybody to try to explain to them why I believe that their system of thought or thinking or philosophy is not correct, and why they have confusion and misfortune in their life, is wrong. So, I mean, I present a picture of myself so I don't get a lot of negative energy from outside. That's kind of the idea. So many times, I'm quiet. I understand that I don't really believe this, what they're saying, but, my idea is self-cultivation of the individual. It's not to change the world, basically. So a lot of times, when you're in a venue that isn't right for you, instead of popping your head up and saying, this is wrong and it's not right, I just kind of let it go. So this idea of camouflage, and I mean, in nature, you can see camouflage. Many, many animals use camouflage. It's how they survive. basically on a daily basis. I mean, the lizards can adapt to different colors around them, so they're not prey for other animals. The tigers are striped, so they crawl through the grass, so the animals can't see them. So camouflage is a natural aspect of nature that everyone uses to adapt to different situations. And we need to do that too, actually, for you to be complete as an individual, as a spiritual and intellectual individual. A lot of times you need to practice this principle of camouflage.
Mm, that's interesting. I, I'm going to consider like taking that into consideration for myself because in my spiritual journey, I've learned a great deal about learning about the truth of who you are and how to communicate that when you are in any situation or any relationship interaction with other people. I haven't given that to
It depends on
the
the
idea of
situation.
camouflage. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the situation you're in. I mean, if you're in a situation that could be dangerous to you, you don't want to look different than everybody else. So, I mean, that's why camouflage goes usually when you don't want to separate yourself and be different than everybody else. There's a famous book that was written where it was an experiment where they took a sparrow and they just painted it different colors. And when they introduced that same sparrow back into the regular, flock of birds, they immediately turned and attacked the bird and killed it, basically, just because it was different. So, I mean, this idea of difference, people are afraid of what they don't understand. So sometimes you need to camouflage. In other circumstances, if you're with intellectual people and it's a rational conversation, then you can open yourself and show who you are internally. But a lot of times, this aspect of camouflage, it's just self-preservation. It's just the idea of survival.
Mm. For example, if I was in a situation where, say, I'm up against something really big and I'm trying to speak up for myself, stand up for myself, and honestly, I am in that situation. And I've had people tell me, just get through it. Uh, because one of the things that seems to be happening is that the more I stand up for myself, the more negative consequences happen, the more things seem to go out of hand or become messy. So, would you say that camouflage is not necessarily about bowing down to the situation and dishonoring who you are? It's merely, like you said, self preservation. It's really about protecting yourself.
Yeah, I guess I would say that absolutely. I mean, internally, I know who I am, and I'm comfortable with that, as you are, and that's how we all should be. And I mean, if those internal values don't jive exactly with society or with the group of people that you're in, you need to camouflage. Basically, that's the idea. We need to understand that most people in society comprise. They've bought the status quo values of society. They've bought the social education and programming that we've got at a very, very young age. They're not about intellectual and spiritual development. They're about material gain. They're about social position. They're about accumulating as much money as possible. I mean, they believe that the success in their life has to do with their social position and how much material gain they have. They don't believe that contentment is one of the things that you strive for in life. Internal peace, contentment, and philosophical and spiritual development for this idea of, spiritual evolution. And that's what separates the Taoist from most other people. We're spiritualists. We develop our soul for this idea of spiritual evolution. And most people, truthfully, I don't mean to sound condescending, but I mean, most people's intellect is at a very, very low level. I mean, I was born in a suburb of Massachusetts, where it was like a blue collar community. And I'm not, I mean, a lot of my friends are tradespeople, and there's nothing wrong with that. But intellectually, they're in a very different place than I am in my life and what I believe, the path that I've chosen. So each person chooses their individual path. And I mean, that's what you need to foster and develop. And you shouldn't let anybody take you off your path. If your path is one of intellectual and spiritual evolution, then you shouldn't let the world take you off that path to tell you, no, you need to get a second job so you can get a nice car. You need to get a third TV. You need to have 5 children. I mean, you don't have to do any of those things if they're not right for you as an individual. I think a lot of people go to counseling because they're confused and they're unhappy. And they're unhappy because their life doesn't map to this status quo life that they're supposed to have. And who's to say what life is real and good and what isn't? Some people have a bunch of children, some people have no children. There's nothing wrong with either one of those paths. You can't say one is right or wrong. I mean, it's just what you choose, and if you're content with that and if it works for you.
Yeah.
So to get rid of the
And
confusion in life, that's really one of the big tests. And then as we have a frequency, we're like a violin. If your violin is stuffed with old dirt and dirty clothes, it won't sound right. So the Tao is this grand symphony, this grand harmony. We each play like an instrument in this grand harmony. If your instrument is full of dirt and dirty clothes, it's not going to sound right. It's not going to go with the harmony of the universe. So you won't be able to play. You won't be allowed to play because your instrument doesn't sound right. So to tune your frequency, your own frequency, you are the instrument basically. So your violin, you have to go with the harmony of the great celestial cosmos. That's the idea.
mm, in Taoism, I understand that it teaches one to have flexible ways of coping with and dealing with challenges as it relates to, for example, Wu Wei. Um, is there also a connection to forgiveness? Well, if I'm experiencing an injustice, not only would I need to learn to accept that situation for what it is, but is there also discussion, thought about how to forgive that injustice that happened in my life?
Um, I mean, not so much about forgiveness. The Taoism is the study of ultimate reality. That's the concept. Ultimate reality. So, um, I guess a lot of the confusion that exists has to do with the idea of a subjective view of reality and an objective view of reality. I mean, reality is what it is, and it exists as it does. Whatever I think about it, or feel about it, or forgive about it, it's not really going to make a difference. When the tsunami comes and the hurricane comes, it covers everybody the same. How I feel about that really doesn't make a big difference. So the idea is to tune yourself to reality, tune yourself to the struggles that exist on a daily basis. I mean, you mentioned suffering in Buddhism earlier, and it's one of the tenets that Taoism and Buddhism agree upon, that when you're born into this life, suffering comes with it. I mean, this life is not a utopia. This life is not a Garden of Eden. It's basically a place where we're tested, where we're sent to develop our intellect and our soul and our spirit, because probably wherever we're going after this is just as tough, if not tougher. Taoism doesn't believe that you go to some kind of heaven where it's some kind of peace and ultimate experience. If you look at most of the Taoist deities, the gods, they're dressed as warriors. They have armor and they have the weapon with them. And it's supposed to showcase the struggle in life. I mean, every day is a struggle for us. It's not easy. I mean, that's the chaos and absurdity and suffering of everyday life. The idea is to use the philosophical principles of Tao to navigate those troubles, that daily problem, basically, or problems. And a lot of times it exists from confrontation from other people. I mean, our life is full of confrontation with other people and other situations. I mean, the struggles of life are every day, and you just need to accept those. Acceptance is a big deal in the Tao. Not so much forgiveness for those things, but more to just say, look, they exist, and I accept it. I can't change it. It goes beyond me, and I navigate it somehow, and exist and try and develop myself internally and achieve contentment. That's the idea.
So after that, I've been thinking about the word faith. And oftentimes when we hear the word faith, people talk about um, faith as in the religion that they follow. But and throughout my readings, I eventually realize that there's also an internal experience of faith. And one of the explanations that I came across was how faith is really a deep trust in life. It and Taoism is that what that means by acceptance?
Um, Faith and acceptance are two different things. Accepting your situation. I mean, people can have a terminal illness, for instance, right? A horrible terminal illness, which is absolutely horrible, right? Cancer, for instance, or some other kind of horrible thing. When they get that, in the end, it's not going to go away. So you need to accept your situation, regardless of how horrible it is. And I mean, the quality of your life and how you prepare for death matters in how you accept your situation. If you don't accept it, you can be angry and bitter for the last 2 years of your life, right? And a lot of people are, and that's a normal reaction to the situation. Or you can accept it and prepare for what comes after. So acceptance in life is the idea of just saying, look, this is a horrible thing, but it exists and I can't change it. And I accept it because, that's what it is. I have this horrible thing and I can't get rid of it, and I have to accept it, basically. If you don't accept it, it's like not accepting reality. And I mean, that's where confusion starts, basically. No matter, life is full of difficult circumstances, and we have to accept those difficult circumstances and deal with them the best that we can. I mean, those are like the cards that you dealt with from the great universe. It's part of our test in life. We believe that all of life is a test to develop your soul and your intellect. And sometimes the great gods send you very challenging circumstances, like the idea of Job in the Bible, for instance, right? This idea of testing, like and it's not just to test your faith, it's to test your adaptation, your ability to survive somehow in these extreme circumstances. And we've all gone through difficult times. I mean, this COVID time is a very difficult time. So acceptance is different than faith. Taoism doesn't really have the concept of blind faith, to be honest. Taoism, part of the existence of an intellect, or a primary intellect, is the thing about asking questions. I mean, you should never really accept anything without asking questions about it and seeing, does it work for you? Is it true? You know what I mean? Accepting things blindly without seeing them work in reality, that's where a lot of times confusion can start. So Taoists basically check everything in reality. And it's not, you're not like a doubting Tom by saying that. It's just saying that I need to prove it works for me in my life. And then I can put it in my kind of bag of techniques that I use to exist. So blind faith, the concept of blind faith doesn't exist. You're supposed to basically test everything in life. I mean, if I'm told that, that this value is good for me, I have to test it and try it and then see, it doesn't work for me as an individual. It may work for my neighbor. It may not work for me. So, blind faith, you have to test everything. That's the idea in Taoism. And it's not like a doubter's philosophy. It's more the opposite. It's to say, I need to make sure that works for me as a free thinking individual.
Yeah. Wanted to ask about in the counseling program that I'm in. We talk about the integration of religion and spirituality in the counseling section. Would you would you say that would be a valuable practice when it comes to mental health that we start now taking into consideration, uh, including incorporating religion and spirituality?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as Taoists, when we counsel people, it's exactly what I said. We don't, because we're mortal and we're finite and we're imperfect. We don't see things perfectly. Our subjective perspective is not perfect. It can't be, right? Because we're limited. We're not gods. I can't see everything clearly, perfectly clearly. In a way, we're looking through like a broken set of glasses in life, and we're doing the best we can with that. Because our perspective and the perspective of every other mortal is imperfect, we really don't believe that another mortal can counsel you. In a way, it's like everybody has a certain level of confusion in their life. It goes with the mortal persona. So one confused person is going to tell me how to live my life as a confused person. So, what we believe is the integration of religion and communication with the great ultimate is the key to this problem. Okay. There are certain ways, and Lin Hun Therapy and Taoist divine guidance go together. Lin Hun Therapy is the way to get rid of your confusion, the way to get rid of the dirty clothes that are in your violin. So once you purify yourself, once your concepts go with reality, they map to nature and understand things clearly, and you've accepted those things, then your frequency is in line with the great ultimate. Then that's the time when you can pray and meditate and communicate. The idea of Chinese shamanism is to get a guide spirit, basically, just like the shamans do. So you
Mm-hmm.
go into a meditative state, you leave your body, your soul basically leaves your body, flies to another dimension, and communicates with your guide spirit. Your guide spirit, in the celestial cosmos, there's no ulterior motives. There's no jealousy. There's no, there's no one wants to control you. No one's trying to make you do something to manipulate you, right? The gods are above that. Even mortal counselors still may have with all due respect, may have their own agenda. Every mortal, even though you try and be to have no biases, unfortunately, biases come with the mortal persona. So even as a counselor, you have some kind of certain biases. They could even be subconscious. They're not even conscious biases. They could be subconscious based on what you learned when you were younger. So the idea of the celestial channel for guidance is it has none of this, right? It has no agenda. It has no biases. It's basically it is a perfect channel of communication as opposed to the mortal persona. So we try and get this guide spirit and to develop a relationship with this guide spirit. And then we go into periodic meditation and talk to them and learn from them. And that's how we tune our character and our persona to be content in life and to understand what's going on and to get closer to the cosmos. So the counseling is actually done through the celestial entity. Basically praying for guidance, that's the idea, or meditating for guidance. And this perfect channel, as I said, it has no ulterior motive, it has no biases, it's perfect. So I would say the integration of religion into a counseling program is primary. I mean, that's exactly what we do. Without connecting with the celestial gods, without preparing yourself for death, I mean, when it happens, we won't be prepared. And that's a horrible thing.
As our meeting comes to an end, I want to ask, as someone who's becoming a counselor and as someone who's moving through life, what message you would impart to me as I move forward?
I would say, counseling it's a very difficult thing. I mean, we try and follow this. It's not a playbook, but it's like a set of principles. We believe that people come to counseling because they're unhappy. And why are they unhappy? Because they're confused. What they believe their life should be and what their life is, those two things don't align. And I mean, that's how depression goes. That's how anxiety goes. So the first thing you need to do is get rid of this confusion. And you need to be comfortable with who you are. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you don't like yourself, Taoism has this concept of what they call healthy egocentrism. And the idea is egocentrism is the perspective of me, right? And if I don't take care of myself, if I don't nourish my own intellect, my own physical capacities, then I can't even help anybody else. So this concept of healthy egocentrism is central in the idea of getting rid of confusion. You have to do what's right for you as an individual, not what everybody's telling you to do, not what the society is telling you to do. I mean, look, you chose the path of religious counseling. That's a very different path today than most people choose, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, and that's probably a difficult path. Most people won't understand why you chose what you chose, even people close to you, you know. But that doesn't mean it's the wrong path for you. If you feel personal fulfillment from this path, if you feel contentment, if you feel acceptance and you're doing the right thing, then that's the thing for you. I mean, I've chose my life to be a Taoist. It's a very different path than most people, but it works for me and it makes me content. So it's right for me, even if it's not a conventional path. Many times our path through life is not the conventional one. And as a matter of fact, you need to fight with the conventional path if it's not the right one for you. That's what most people struggle with. That's where most of their confusion comes from.
I appreciate that. I've noticed that the more I change, and I've been changing quickly, the more people tell me they don't recognize me, especially those that they are close to me. My last question would be, what do you know now that you didn't know before you went into Taoism?
Um, I guess my spiritual journey has been a long one. It's not done yet. I would say probably the most, you know, probably about probably 10 years ago, we wrote a series of books on the great celestial foxes. They're a specific Taoist deity that our clan of Taoist lineage has a relationship with. And the dogma of these great spirits was never really documented in any kind of way. There's a lot of confusion about them. It's basically like kitsune, like the Japanese foxes. They exist in many different cultures, but that's who these deities are. We spent 6 years writing a 3-volume series on the great celestial foxes, and 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 I spent many hours with Master Anatole, Grandmaster Anatole, chewing these concepts and trying to understand them. And in the end, it was very interesting to me. What we said was that life after death is basically like life with no body. So, like, your physical body dies, and the only thing that exists is your intellect or your soul. That piece of energy goes to some other place to exist. So, now if you think about it, that means that your whole existence after life is life with no body. If you don't get any stimulation or intellectual pleasure from intellectually talking about things like we are now, from your thoughts, if you can't be alone with your thoughts, if you don't have any philosophy, if you can't live a full life without a body, then probably you won't exist in the afterlife. I mean, and if you look at most people, their life is all around their physical nature. We had one guy I know, he basically said, my life is work, beer, sleep. That's what he said. I work, I drink beer, and I sleep. So I have sex, I drink, well, those things are fun and great. That's not the purpose of life. In a way, when you die, you're like a brain in a jar. So, I mean, if you can't have any kind of stimulating life through conversations, through intellectual pursuits, through philosophical concepts, then why would you exist after death with no body? So, I mean, you have to be a thinking individual to progress into the afterlife. You have to have some kind of intellect. You can't just be, work, bear, sleep. Does that make sense? And I mean, for me, well, Grandmaster Anatole has an innate talent to make incredibly complex things very simple. And for me, that really gravitated towards the afterlife. If you're a brain in a jar, how much, contentment, how much fulfillment can you get in life? Only through the philosophical conversations we're having now, David, right? If you're a regular status quo guy, and I mean, if this is not interesting to you or stimulating at all, then I mean, you're going to dissolve after you die. You don't want to go there. You don't want to exist there. There's nothing there for you, basically. And unfortunately, that's 90% of the people in life.
That Master Pukako, thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
I'll take this with me for the rest of my life. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
No, it was your questions were interesting, and I can see, it's interesting. You're kind of developing your own solitary journey through life now, and and you're right. If you're not comfortable with yourself as an individual, it's going to be very hard for you to counsel people.
Yeah.
So whatever you are internally, if you get fulfillment and contentment from that, then that's the right thing for you. Just like Mozart.